Hello and welcome to The Food Chain from the BBC World Service with me, Ruth Alexander. Today, can you learn to love a food you hate? For me, that food is prawns. Joining me to help us understand our food aversions are Dr. Rachel Hertz, a neuroscientist who's an expert on the psychological science of smell at Brown University in the United States and author of Why You Eat What You Eat. Dr. Dana Small, a professor of neurology and Canada Excellence Research Chair in Brain and Metabolism at McGill University. And also Claire Thornton-Wood, a registered dietitian in the south of England and spokesperson for the British Dietetic Association. Are there any foods that you each really hate?
Well, the only food that I really dislike, sort of at the core, is natto, which is a Japanese fermented soybean dish. There are a couple of other foods that, through unfortunate psychological mechanisms, I have come to dislike, but there is nothing inherently unpalatable about them, and I could probably be retrained.
Claire?
I have two foods that I have inherently disliked. One was tomatoes, but in probably the past 5 years, I've actually trained myself to like them and eat them. But the food that remains for me that I really cannot stand is tinned fish in any form, tuna, pilchards, sardines. I just can't bear it.
And Dana?
I think I'm a victim of one of the psychological mechanisms that Rachel was talking about. I really dislike coconut, in particular Malibu and 7-Up. And Malibu it's a coconutty sweet liqueur, but that aversion has generalized to many different foods that have coconut in it, and even suntan lotion with coconut. So across the board, I avoid coconuts.
Dana, which parts of the brain are involved in food likes and dislikes?
Well, it's a distributed network that includes some sensory regions like the insular cortex and the orbital frontal cortex, and also areas of the brain that are important for emotion and reward. And these are working together to code both the sensory experience and sort of the affective layer that is over top of the sensation. In particular, if you talk about foods that you dislike and you have an aversion for, there's a couple of regions that are really important. One is the amygdala. So the amygdala, if you have had a negative experience with the food, the amygdala is really important for associating the sensory properties. So for example, the taste of coconut with an experience of malaise. And after that pairing, the amygdala changes how it's responding to that food and will forever, well, maybe not forever, but at least for quite some time, help you avoid that by producing negative sensation when you encounter it.
And are food dislikes learned or genetic, hardwired in some way?
Both. So there's many reasons why you can dislike a food. For example, you could, via genetics, smell coriander or taste coriander differently. So that's genetic. But there's also a really strong learning component. And I think that probably begins even in utero. So with fetuses being exposed to the foods the mothers eat, taste and smell are some of the earliest senses to become functional. And you can bring those preferences with you. At least postnatally a little bit, but there's also evidence that can influence liking well into childhood and even into adulthood. And then all throughout your life, if you encounter a new food, you might not like it so much at first, but especially if you eat it when you're hungry, and especially if it has a lot of energy in it, you can quickly come to like it through a process called flavor nutrient conditioning.
Rachel, why does smell have such a powerful effect on whether we like a food or not?
When we smell something, and food aromas are part of this as much as the lily that you're passing by on the street, it activates a very strong visceral response in us, either positive or negative. But actually, if we've never been exposed to the aroma before, and particularly if it's in a food, we may experience a sort of cautious, what's referred to as neophobia. I'm not sure what that is. So from an adaptive evolutionary perspective, better to be a little cautious and not jump in and grab that pretty red berry and put it in your mouth because you don't know what might happen.
Neophobia, fear of something new.
Correct. Yeah.
So the thing with flavor, as a very wonderful colleague of mine said, Gordon Shepherd, flavor is in the brain. And what he was meaning by that is that flavor is a multimodal perception. And so flavor involves the touch sensations in the mouth, the taste sensations in the mouth, and also olfaction, which is localized to the mouth. So it depends on receptors in the nose, but that it is localized to the mouth so that when you eat something like a strawberry, it feels like the strawberry is in your mouth. But if you have a cold or if you block your nose and you stop the volatiles from going up into the nose, you block the strawberry sensation. And that's because that's olfaction. And so you have these three sensory systems that are all distinct, have distinct receptors, and project to the same areas of the brain. And very important for this integration is the insular cortex, where flavor perceptions are made. And so if you think about, flavor and your affective responses and whether you like it or not, it's really not the taste that's so important, especially after learning. It is the olfactory component. So a strawberry has sweetness, maybe a little sourness, but strawberryness is olfaction. Sweet and sour, those are sensations in tons of different foods, and they don't tell us anything about the identity of the food.
So our food dislikes are very complicated then. Claire, you're a paediatric expert working with children. Do you see that our encounters with food as children can have a very big impact on us?
Definitely, they do have a big impact. If you think about the newborn baby drinking breast milk or formula milk, they're very sweet products, and so a baby is drawn towards sweet foods. So when we're weaning, we often try to get mothers to move more towards the slightly bitter end of food. So things like Brussels sprouts, broccoli, things like that, to begin to use those with babies, because otherwise their expectations are always towards sweet foods. I think the other thing is there's quite a bit of role modeling that's involved. So if a mother is trying to give her children food that she doesn't like, the children will very easily pick up the signals that the mother doesn't like this food, and that can often mean that they won't like it also.
On my pet hate, king prawns in particular, I think it's the tentacles and the tails. I've never actually had one. So what's that all about? I say I hate them, but I don't really know what they taste like.
Well, I would tell you that it's because of the concept that you've conjured around them and the tentacles and the tails, the way you just described that was obviously viscerally, visually really unappealing to you and maybe conjuring up creepy crawlies. I mean, this is one of the issues right now with trying to get people, especially because of, resources with foods being limited in various parts of the world and probably increasingly so, to move over from eating mammals as a protein source to eating insects as a protein source. And most people have a really negative connotation of eating insects, especially Western European civilizations or cultures, whereas in various other ones around the world right now, particularly Asian cultures and some cultures in South America, they're consumed very readily, but it has to do with how you perceive what you're thinking that you're consuming. And so, the tentacles and everything else you've just described about the prawns, very insect-like, very probably in the cadre of things that are unappealing. But if you changed your mind about what they were, or if they were somehow presented in a different way, you might be perfectly fine with trying it.
We asked people following the BBC World Service Facebook page whether they'd ever learned to love a food that they hated, and indeed many had.
I'm Michelle from Glasgow, and I spent the first 35 years of my life as an ardent mayonnaise hater.
I'm Christian from the Philippines, and I used to really hate Korean cuisine because Korean cuisine is generally spicy.
I detested it from childhood for some unknown reason, and I couldn't bear the look of it. I couldn't bear the scent of it.
And then I became an English language teacher at an English school for Koreans, and dinner was free. So every night they would serve spicy Korean food.
So I avoided it, and I avoided ordering wraps and sandwiches in supermarkets and in restaurants because it was such an ubiquitous condiment. Then one day, for some unknown reason, I woke up and found that thought of it no longer disgusted me.
And eventually, I grew to love Korean food in general. So I love tteokbokki, gamjatang, and jeokbuk.
That shows you can learn to love a food you hate. And sometimes, as with the case of Michelle in Glasgow, you can just kind of wake up and decide you want to get over this.
That's kind of unusual, I would say, but when I work in clinic with children, the real progress that children make in perhaps trying or learning to eat new foods actually comes from their motivation. And if they don't have the motivation to want to eat that food or to make a change, it's actually very difficult to do anything. So an example would be a teenager who had lots of foods they didn't like, but really wanted to eat pizza, because pizza is a meal that's eaten in lots of different settings, and to eat pizza would mean that they could go out with their friends, and having that motivation to want to eat something will then often lead to them being able to eat something. One of the really good techniques that we might use is something called masking, where you dip a food that you don't like into something that you do like. So that might be tomato ketchup, mayonnaise, applesauce. So what you're doing is you're eating that food, but you're covering the taste with the taste of a food that you like, and then you can gradually remove the tomato ketchup, add less each time until you're eating the food on its own without the tomato ketchup.
So if you want to get over a food dislike, are there proven techniques that will work?
Well, from my perspective, I don't think there's any one proven absolute will work for everybody. I think it's a variety of different things. And one of the things actually that could be a sort of barrier to entry is the differences in genetics of just the olfactory system itself, in that some people have a great number of receptors that might be tuned to a specific quality in a particular food. And so at any level of presentation in a normal sort of setting, it's really too strong for them. And too strong means unpleasant generally. So even hearing the nicest sound, it can be unpleasant if it's too loud. And so if you are too sensitive at a genetic level to qualities within the food, that might be sort of make it too difficult to get over it. But otherwise, I would think, and Claire and Dana, please jump in, that various different types of psychological and also social manipulations might be effective. And one of the things in the Korean food example, it seems like, when you share food with other people in the social setting of a meal, it becomes very different than just eating on your own. One example where this really works well is actually with spice. So the burn of hot pepper, people, if they're exposed to that just pure pepper burn without the food context, will say, oh my God, this is terrible. It's way too hot. It's really, really unpleasant. You give them that exact same amount of pepper burn, but in a food context, and they're like, oh, no, this is a delicious pepper. I love this. I'll eat this all the time, and so on. So food in and of itself for various people can actually be the mediator for changing perception. But I would say social, emotional, motivational factors are all involved. And it just, I would say, trial and error with different people.
What we've been really talking about is sort of three separate strategies to improve your acceptance of a particular food. So on the one hand, you have these top-down strategies. And it's interesting with olfaction that the perception is a reflection of the actual physical and chemical qualities of an odor, but it is also very malleable. So, for example, you can have the exact same odor and you can call it body odor and you don't like it. And you take that odor and you call it a fine French cheese, and then people like it more. And that is an example of a top down influence that actually shapes the way the brain is processing that thing. And indeed, perception actually changes because perception is not in the food itself,
So
it's in the
context
brain.
matters.
So, context, and we've been talking about this in terms of social context, but you can also have verbal context. You can have labeling on food, colors, even, like if you present something and it looks beautiful, that may get you to be more likely to accept it. And these are all examples of sort of these top down influences on the basic sensory code of that flavor in the brain. Then you have another strategy, which we've also been talking about, which is the actual sensory perception. So without any sort of layered, how sweet it is, potentially the spiciness, whatever. And these things you can change by adding different ingredients, maybe melted garlic butter, for example, or dipping it in ketchup. So that's another strategy. And then the third strategy is really learning. And this is super important for developing a different palate and also explains why we have different cuisines in different countries. So if you eat something, even if you initially don't like it, especially when you're really hungry, then the energy that let's say the resources, so the nutrients and the energy you receive from that food are very salient for the body. And those sensing that energy sends signals to the brain reward system and releases dopamine, which is a key chemical for learning. Dopamine is really critical for learning and for motivation. So what the dopamine does is it links that particular flavor with a post-ingestive consequence. So if it's giving you energy when you're really hungry, that's a really positive post-ingestive consequence. And so the next time you see that thing, you may salivate. It may cause a bunch of physiological changes that because it's predicting calories, it's predicting something positive. It may also catch your attention more. It will motivate your behavior. And then eventually when you consume it, you can actually change pleasure. You can change and learn to like something. But there's sort of two components here. One is the saliency and understanding that thing is, when I say understanding, I'm talking about the body understanding. So the insect, which you've eaten when you were super hungry, before it was an insect. Now it's predicting calories. So now it's not an insect, it's a food. And so if you're hungry again, you will be drawn to that food
Unconsciously,
source.
this is.
Unconsciously, there's a lot that really works sort of subliminally in flavor preference formation. And it is really linking sort of the availability of different foods with its biological benefit. I have an anecdote from a study. Let me just tell it really, really quickly. This is a study that was about food craving. This was from a woman called Marcy Pelshaw, who was at Monell Chemical Senses Institute. And so she put people on this monotonous diet for 2 weeks. And the monotonous diet was liquid Ensure, not very yummy. And at the beginning, maybe people didn't mind drinking the liquid Ensure, but certainly by the end, they were like totally bored of this liquid Ensure. So it's like a protein, a meal in a can. Then they did the study in the scanner with other foods, and the fact that they'd had this monotonous meal for so long made them crave more different sorts of foods. So that was the experiment. But what the subjects also reported a couple weeks later is that they began craving that liquid Ensure.
So if I ate prawns only for a week, then by the end of that week, I would probably get quite a fancy for them.
Well, you might crave them, but it may not still be the same as deriving pleasure from eating them.
So what I'm taking from what you've just said is that if I'm to get over my dislike of prawns, say, I should make the dining room, perhaps get the best plate out, tablecloth, candles, some nice music, cook the prawns in something delicious, maybe garlic, butter, something like that, and eat them with someone I really like and just maybe that whole experience will help.
The component that you missed is and being really hungry. So creating the context in your body that will ramp up the value of that.
I think there's something else I would say about people eating food that they don't like, and I often talk in clinic about the difference between not liking a food, really hating a food, and almost having a fear around eating food. So for instance, just say that you had eaten prawns in the past and you had become unwell from eating them, you'd had what you call a dodgy prawn. There's a good chance that you might actually associate that with eating the prawn and think, oh, I don't want to eat a prawn again because it's going to make me unwell. So that's a sort of fear-based avoidance. And when we think about that, one good way to work with that is that you always know that you can refuse. So if you do decide to put the prawn in your mouth, you actually have a serviette so that you can surreptitiously spit that prawn out, because we are conditioned that it's rude to spit your food out. So some people might actually not get as far as putting the food in their mouth because they feel that if they do, the only option they've got is to swallow it. So it's really good to have an alternative option.
Ruth, I would also add in your particular case, one thing that I would recommend in terms of your sitting down to enjoying a dish of prawns is that actually somebody else, somebody who you would trust in the kitchen to have, good skills and so forth, prepares it for you and also removes that cartilage, the sort of spindly things and all the tail and all the tentacles and so forth, so that it doesn't look the same to you as you find when you're, let's say, getting it, fresh from the store and so forth, where the little beady eyes are there as well. So I would say that having someone prepare it where the visual aspects are removed that you find offensive, and then also someone who you really trust. There's also, I think Claire would say this too, this kind of feeling like if someone who you trust is making this for you and you know that they have, good skills in the kitchen and that they wouldn't serve you something that you would have a bad experience with, that can also really help sort of facilitate it.
I think trust is a really important thing to think about, because if you were to go to somebody's house and they were to give you a chicken sandwich and either they hadn't told you that it contained a prawn or they thought, oh, I wonder if I slip a prawn in, whether that'll be okay, you would probably be completely horrified and actually would never want to eat in their house again, because you have completely lost trust in what they've provided for you. So I think it is always important to be having food in a trustful way and not having people just try to slip in a food that you don't like in the hope that it might make you eat it, because it will actually have the opposite effect almost certainly.
Well, someone I trust is the producer of this programme, Izzy Greenfield, and she has been to the shops and bought some prawns, because we kind of thought, well, look, while I have you all here, this is the time to do it. Thank you for the fork. But talking to you, it's, it helps.
Did she bring you any tomato ketchup?
There's some kind of spicy mayonnaise. So I'm going to do this.
That's pretty brave for a first taste. I would have recommended that you put your fork into it and you smelt it, had a good look at it, and then maybe touch the end, say on your bottom lip.
Right.
And then if you felt comfortable, you could put your tongue out a bit like a snake does and touch the tip of your tongue. So obviously you won't get a huge amount of taste from that, but you'll just get a tiny bit. And then if you wanted to put your teeth into it, you could, and then take a tiny bite. But again, feel free to spit it out. But it looks to me like you're actually doing really well.
It's quite textural. I feel that was a... Oh gosh, now I've got something on the script as well. And I feel it was maybe a bit of a tail or something going down my throat. And it's between my teeth. I feel very brave. But I want to thank you all for your expertise and your advice and kindness in helping me get through that. Thank you very much to each of my guests. Dr. Rachel Hertz.
My pleasure, and bon appetit.
Dr. Dana Small.
Thank you.
And Claire Thornton-Wood.
It's been a great afternoon, and all the best with your prawn eating.
Thank you very much, and good luck with the tinned fish. And thank you for watching. The Food Chain is available in audio as well every week. You can find it by searching online or wherever you get your BBC podcasts.